This is Drew Jones of Drewsguitarshop in Seattle, Washington, and I wanted to show off this Goya G-17 that I just got done working on. So this is a guitar that I'm selling. There's a link to the Reverb page, assuming that that link is still active and going to an active listing. Its guitar is still for sale and you could buy it. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about the guitar and things that I've done to it. So it's a pretty solid vintage guitar. It's got a lot of really cool patina, a little bit of crazing in this old nitro finish, which kind of makes this guitar just a little bit more lovable. At least to me, I really like things that kind of show their age. It's made of solid wood, this guitar in particular was made in Sweden. The craftsmanship on it is really great. I really like Goya classical guitars. I generally find that I really like their tone, and I really like the way that their necks feel, and just a lot of different things about them. So just playing it. This guitar has a lot of headroom, which means that it's got a lot of range. So it's got a loud voice if you want it to be loud, and it's got it's a very soft voice if you want it to be very soft, which is really cool. And that's one of the things that you really get from a solid spruce top, which this guitar has. So as with all the guitars that I sell here at the shop, I've done some work on this to kind of bring it above above mark in terms of what's going to be available in the used market. I generally like to put stuff up that has had the work done on it that I would do on one of my own guitars. Like if I were buying this guitar used to play for myself, I would do all the things that I've done to this guitar, just because I think that really does kind of bring it up to the level of being a performing instrument. The first thing that I do with guitars is I'll replace the nut in the saddle with hand-carved bone. The nut on this guitar is just beautifully fit. Like just running your finger along here, you can't really feel where the nut ends and where the guitar starts, which is really cool. The nuts that I carve for my instruments here are special in that I carve them specifically to be low friction. Generally, when people have tuning problems with instruments, it's because of a poorly cut nut and not actually having to do with the tuner. Sometimes there's some other issues someplace, but 9 times out of 10 when there's a tuning problem, it's actually the nut. And what happens is just that the string gets pinched in the nut slots and doesn't glide very smoothly. You can always tell whether or not that's the problem by really just like looking at a tuner and seeing if the needle on the tuner corresponds movement-wise to what you're doing with the tuning button. If you're tuning the tuning button and the needle just kind of stays put, that means that you're tightening everything between the tuner and the nut, but you're not actually tightening anything beyond the nut. And eventually that'll slip, and it'll cause the string to go sharp or flat, depending on which way you're tuning it. So, the way that I carve these nut slots is that I actually I don't have any sharp corners, and so there's a parabolic curve that string rides on in 2 different directions, and so the nut slot is actually kind of shaped like the horn of a trumpet. And it's also got just the perfect amount of space for the string to glide smoothly through without having to grab onto the sides. And I knock all the corners off basically, and so we're dealing with a very, very, very smooth surface. I also treat my nuts with a lubricant that helps things move, and I also apply graphite generally to the nut slots to help things move along. And so that's what's been done here. The saddle on this guitar is pretty cool too, though, in that the last step for me with doing classical setups in particular is I really, really like to get the intonation dialed in perfectly. And what that intonation means is that when you play the note up here, open, that it should match the note at the 12th fret, the octave. And ideally, you want those to be perfect. Now, generally on electric guitars, we're able to get those pretty close, but generally on acoustic guitars, we kind of get them in the ballpark. Well, I get them even further into the ballpark with the saddles that I carve for classical guitars. In this case, the last thing that I'll do once I get the string height and everything set and during the setup, the last thing that I'm doing during that setup is I'm actually sitting there with a tuner and with a pencil that I've actually, it's a mechanical pencil that I've actually further sharpened the tip of using sandpaper, and so I've got a very, very fine point. And what I'll do is I'll play that open note and then play it at the octave, and I'll observe where that needle lands on the tuner, and judging by where the string is currently making contact, etc. stuff, I can figure out where to put the contact point to get that string pretty close in terms of intonation. And what that creates is an instrument that has much better intonation, is able to make much crisper, nicer sounding chords with less crunch, less distortion, and also able to stay in tune, when you go up the neck. So if you're playing with somebody and you're playing up here as opposed to down here, in some cases, especially with classical guitars, you might notice that there's just a little bit of, sounds a little off, the tuning is a little off. And it's not because the guitar's out of tune, it's because the temperament is out. Basically, your intonation is off, and so you're not actually playing an F where an F should be. It's something else. And so these notes play very much in tune with each other. Now, these are new strings, and so I can't guarantee that this is going to sound is going to be as perfect as an example as I want it to be. But I'm going to try to do an audio recording and also link the audio recording in the description, and you can really hear through a good microphone what this guitar sounds like. But I'm going to play all the G's. Now you notice that there's not really a wavy quality to that, and that's because all of those G's are resonating pretty close with each other. I like to use G as an example because that's usually the one that kind of stands out to me on instruments, because generally the low note is going to sound a little sharp, the open note is going to sound perfect, and then you're going to have this high note which sometimes can be a little flat or whatever, but in any case you end up with kind of three different G's, but this is three of the same G. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play at the open, and then I'll hit the harmonic, and then I'll hit the octaves so that you can kind of hear the intonation on this instrument. So, pretty close. It's an acoustic, and so it's an acoustic with a solid top, and so this top is going to breathe and move depending on what the moisture is doing. And so it's never really possible to get an acoustic guitar exactly perfectly dialed in, which is why we tend to focus on intonation more on electrics than acoustics. But this one is pretty damn close. So the next thing that I've done here to this guitar is that I've gone ahead and I've re-level, crowned, and polished the frets. So if you're somebody who buys used guitars, you'll frequently notice that the frets show a lot of wear. And in some cases, buying cool vintage guitars, especially ones probably from the 70s like this guy, I mean, you're looking at a lot of fret wear in some cases. And even on classical guitars, the metal wound strings can sometimes cause a lot of wear, and that was the case in this one and with a number of other classical guitars that are around the same age. You see the same kind of stuff that causes pitting in the frets. Well, so what I do here is that I actually re-level all the frets, and so I get rid of all those pits and all of the damage and little nicks and things that tend to accumulate over the years, and get the frets perfectly level, which generally is a good idea to do on an older instrument anyway, just because it's possible that those frets have moved around over time, and they may not be level, and oftentimes they aren't, which is kind of why I started doing this at the shop, just on everything, just because a lot of times they need them. So I've gone ahead and re-leveled, but that's not the end of the story with frets. You can flatten the tops of them, and that will get them level for sure, but it doesn't actually create a good playing surface. What you really want is a crowned fret. So the top of that fret you want to re-sculpt to be a very round surface with a fine point that string can come to rest on. That fine point represents where the fret's location is on the scale. So if you have a flat fret, your contact point may be here or it may be here, and the ideal location for that fret is here in the middle somewhere. Well, if you crown it, now the point of contact for that string is where the middle of the fret is, and that's why that crowning is important. It also eliminates the possibility of like weird buzzes or dead spots in a lot of cases that can happen with flat frets, and that's a good thing. So the next thing is getting the fret ends nicely sculpted and so they're nice and comfortable. This is actually a really good feeling neck, and then polishing them out. If you look at these frets on the fretboard, they're very, very, very shiny. And the shine is not just aesthetic, though they do look better when they are polished, but also prevents kind of the gritty sort of sound that you can get when you're bending notes on frets that are not very smoothly polished. So fret work, really, if it's not like a full level crown and polish, there's some corners being cut and you're not really getting the full potential out of that fretwork. Now, would I advocate for a full level crown and polish on every instrument? Maybe not. If it's like a $40 student guitar, it's being played by a very, very beginning student, maybe just do a spot level where it needs it if you can get away with that. But for something like this, it's a nicer old instrument. Yeah, definitely go through the level crown polish. And I would only advocate for anything less than that on instruments that really were just kind of get you through the night sort of practice instruments that were not going to be used for serious play, because it does create a lot of problems to cut those sorts of corners. And so lastly, we'll talk about the setup on this guitar. I have done a full setup on this guitar, which means dialing in the nut, dialing in the neck, and getting the string height and everything dialed in. And what we end up with is action that should be very comfortable, but also without any buzzing. So if you play this guitar up and down the neck, it rings nicely, and you're getting nice tone out of it, but you're also not having to like really fight with the strings and push down really hard. And you're not dealing with any like weird buzzing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play every note on this fretboard that I can get to. It's going to be a little tedious. I'm sorry about that, but just to give you an idea of what that sounds like. Obviously, getting up here into this range isn't something most people would do, but if you do get up into that range, those frets still are really nice. So anyway, this thing is going out of tune a little bit. These are fresh strings. They're nylon strings. I restrung this with Savarez red card strings, which are really, really nice, and I really do like them. They're not maybe the best classical strings that I've ever played on, but they are like 15 to 20 bucks and sound really, really nice, and they're a mark above a lot of the cheaper stuff out there. And in fact, generally when I have somebody come in here with I'm gonna name drop here, Diodario Pro Arts, I'll actually try to get them to see if they want to upgrade to the red cards, just because it's just a few bucks more, but it also is quite a significant difference in tone. I really, really like the way that these red cards play. I like the way that they sound, and I would recommend them. These are pretty nice strings. And so anyway, yeah, that's about everything that I have to say about this. About this Goya G-17. The serial number in it is 266 266-426. That number again is 266-426. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in the ad too, just so that if anybody wants to look it up and see what the age on it is, they can. Also probably date it myself, obviously, and put that in the ad as well. But anyway, yeah. So totally, I would totally be stoked to see this instrument go to a good home. And if you think that you might want to claim this instrument and it's still for sale, I'd be very pleased to ship it out to you. Or if you're in Seattle, I can also do pickup. But yeah, the Goya G-17. It's a really, really cool guitar, and this one in particular is in great condition. Thanks for watching.